Good morning and welcome to the very first Waypoint Sunday experience of 2021. Guys, we've made it. 2020 is behind us and we look at this year full of hope, optimism and excited about what God might be doing this year. We don't know how it's going to pan out. We all make our plans and we kind of hope for the best, but ultimately we don't know what's going to happen this year. But what I do know is that the changes and the stuff that we do now could make a big impact going on for the rest of the year. So that is why this Sunday and the next Sunday, we're going to bring it back to basics. And that's why we've called this series that we're doing now 4PE. But before we get to that, I just want to let you know that we will be gathering online for the next couple of weeks until further notice, because we want to protect our community. We want to impact as many people as possible in the most effective way possible, and also playing to our strengths, which is community, not just gathering on Sundays, but being able to reach people far and wide and in the crevices of our communities that Sundays necessarily gathering can't. So here we are. It's 4PE week 1. And before we go further, I want to play you a sound. Now, see if you can identify this sound that I'm going to play for you right now. So, if you can recognize that sound, guess what? That means you are quite old. That's right. To all you young guys and youngsters who might be thinking, what was that? Sounds like something out of Fortnite or Warzone. That was the sound of a fax machine. Now, a fax machine was one of the best inventions yet. What a fax machine allowed you to do was you could write a letter or type a letter or whatever that might be. And what you would do is you would put it into the fax machine. You would dial a number. That's right. You would dial the number which you've memorized or you had in your phone book. And then you would dial that number and send it to someone else who has a fax machine. And their phone would ring and then their fax machine would print out that exact same letter as a copy. How amazing is that? It's not that amazing, right? I mean, look at emails, look at what we can do these days. But that was how we started out, by sending emails, sending letters, faxes to someone else. But eventually the fax machine couldn't keep up because something more relevant and better took its place. Now that story of the fax machine actually reminds me a lot of the church, because you know, people started out, and most of us probably had a really great experience with church growing up, and the church really enriched our lives. But as we got older, you know, some of those stuff that we learned and some of the stuff from church that was ingrained in us just kind of fell flat or maybe seemed more hollow. And sometimes it was because of decisions we've made, but a lot of times it is because of the way that the church came across, the way that the church treated people, and the beliefs that, you know, some people held often became antiquated. And ultimately, you know, the solutions that the church offered to the modern problems just didn't quite seem enough. Now, by far the majority of people's issue with the church nowadays is not because of stuff that Jesus did or said or to do with his resurrection. You know, actually most people would agree that his teachings and the stuff that he came to do is actually a great way to live your life. It's actually a great philosophy to take into life. No, people's big thing with the church, if you would speak to people right now, was the list of things that the church is actually against. The stuff that the church has portrayed and just overall, if you look at the next generation, the church just hasn't become relevant anymore. If you were to ask people on the street, what the church is against, they would be able to give you a whole list of stuff. But if you were to ask people, what do you think the church is for? People would be struggling to name a whole list. People might even struggle to name 3 or 4 things. Now that is where we are today. And in this pandemic that we are finding ourselves in right now, it becomes even more confusing. What is the church for? Is the church for me? Is the church actually there to help? Or is it just another institution that expects people to conform to the way they do things? Now, do you know why we all love stuff like superhero movies? It's because it's simple. It's good versus bad. That's it. And it's simple. And in these days, simple is something we all crave. Because of the hecticness and the so much information that we're getting, the tough crises that we're facing that people have never had to face before, we find ourselves craving, simple. And more often than not, the church has not made it simple. Some people would say that the church is for, if you had to ask most people, I think people would say the church is for, probably the more powerful people in society, maybe the more rich, maybe the people that have it all together, the people that, the good people that you think that is a good person. That is what the church is ultimately for. Isn't that the way we all are thinking? But to answer the question of who the church is for, we have to first delve a bit deeper. We need to understand, who is God for? Is God for the rich? Is He for the powerful? Is He only for the good people? Is He for the people that's got it all together and the rest, is just on their own? More often than not, we put our circumstances and what we're going through on God. And we view through those lens of circumstances how God sees us and how He treats us. And this is easy when it's to think and fall in that trap, because if it's going well, man, I think God should be for me. If things are going the way that I want them to go, God must be impressed with that, Maybe that's because God is blessing me, because He's happy with what I'm doing. But the ultimate flip side to that, and this is where that falls flat, is when I'm going through some tough times, or I look at my neighbors who have maybe lost their jobs. Maybe you have lost your job. Maybe you've lost someone. We've all know people that is struggling with COVID or has contracted it. Maybe we're struggling with loss, struggling with a marriage that just seems doomed to fail or has already failed. In those moments, is God still for us? Surely He can't be, because that's not how He designed things to be. Now, the amazing thing about this is that Paul, one of the writers of the New Testament, actually addresses this issue that a lot of Christians were facing in that time as well. The Christians in the early church were sitting with a lot of the same problems we're sitting with now. Things were not going well for them. In fact, they were staring death in the face, like many of us currently are staring loss and all those things in the face. But Paul actually writes this in Romans 8 verse 31. And he says this: "What then shall we say to these things?" Now, what things is he talking about? He's talking about suffering in the light of God's promises. What should we say in the light, in the midst of all the suffering? What shall we say to these things? And he continues and he says, "If God is for us, who can be against us?" He's saying that if we're experiencing suffering, God can actually be for us. If things aren't going the way that I wanted them to go, or life just seems unfair, Or, I'm at my last road, I'm at my last stretch, I've lost everything, my marriage, my job, I've lost family. Can God still be for me? Does He hear me? Does He see me? And Paul writes this: He who did not spare His own Son, but gave Him up for us all, how will He not also with Him graciously give us all things? Paul's answer for how you can know that God is for you, no matter what you're going through, is the fact and evidence that God sent His Son to die for you. He gave the ultimate sacrifice so that you never again have to doubt, is God on my side? Has God got my back? You never again have to doubt that. And the amazing thing is that is not pending on circumstances, because you and I both know that in this world circumstances will change, but God will never change. And the fact that He put that sacrifice down for you and for me shows that God is for you. Now, this term, I want to stick with this term sinners before we go further. I just want to get to the term sinners. Now, sinners is a loaded word. It comes with a lot of baggage. Sinners actually implies, and we try to stay away from that word, because sinners doesn't imply necessarily what that word entails, but sinners actually imply that on sinners it leads to judgment. Sinners need to be judged. And that's why we kind of try and steer away from that word. And maybe we call ourselves, mistakers, or, best intentioners. But if you really think about it deeply, it's not good enough. Those words will never encapsulate, because I will always go back to selfish way of thinking. I will always go back to what I want above others. It will always lead to self-destructive tendencies. And at the end of the day, I will always become my own worst enemy. If I do not realize that I, just like everyone else, am ultimately a sinner. And once I realize that, I can realize that God is for me and He's for sinners. He came to die for the sinners. He came to die for me. And that means that God is for the sinners. Those who have lost their way, those who have lost everything, those who have messed up countless times again. God is for them. So if God is for whoever Jesus came to die for, that means God is for sinners. So I know this season has been tough for a lot of reasons. And I hope that as a church, as a faith community, we can rally around this next passage that I'm going to read. Because before we can go further and say, what is the church for? We need to realize that God is for sinners. God is for the broken, those who have lost, and those that don't have it all together. So in Romans 8 verse 35 to 39, Paul writes this, and maybe this is what you need to hear today. This encouragement starting this new year, 2021. This is maybe what you need to hear going forward. Who shall separate us from the love of Christ? Shall tribulation or distress or persecution or famine or nakedness or danger or sword? As it is written, for your sake we are being killed all day long. We are regarded as sheep to be slaughtered. No, in all these things we are more than conquerors through Him who loved us. For I am sure that neither death nor life, or angels nor rulers, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus our Lord. I love that passage. Nothing can separate us from the love of God. So what if that is true? What if that is the one thing that you choose to believe this year? That against all obstacles, against all things, no matter what this world says, no matter what politics say, no matter what culture or your circles or your influence or your work environment says, you can know that God is for you and God loves you. What if that one truth defines you for this year? How would your year look? You know, your circumstances may not change. And more often than not, we still in for a tough year. I expect us to still go through a tough year. But just maybe you might be going into those circumstances completely different if you stand on this truth that God is for you. So my hope is that this message and this truth will do amazing things in your life and in our lives as a faith community. You know, next week we're going to look at, what does it look like when God is for us? How does it look like when we live that out and show people that we are also for them? But for now, I want you to know that God is for you above all else. No matter what the world says, no matter what the news says, no matter what your circumstances say, God is for you and He loves you and He's paid the highest price so that you can live in that certainty. And for us at Waypoint, because God is for sinners, because He's for the brokenhearted, therefore Waypoint is for the sinners and the brokenhearted. And that is what I hope and I believe this can be. The church was never meant to be a building or just a Sunday, but the church was always meant to be people, a gathering of people influencing the people around them and showing that God is for them. As we end off this message, we're going to play a song that was recorded last year from the church in Port Elizabeth. Various members of different churches coming together and singing this blessing over our city and over not just good people and rich and powerful people, but singing it over the broken, the hurting, those that have messed up so many times, singing this blessing over them. So listen with open heart and receive these words.
The Lord bless you and keep you.
Make His face shine upon you and be gracious to you. Lord, turn His face toward you
And give you peace.
Lord, bless you and keep you.
Make His face shine upon you and be gracious to you.
The Lord turn His face toward you
And give you peace. Amen. 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 The Lord bless you and keep you. Make His face shine upon you and be gracious to you.
The Lord turn His
generations.
and your family, and your children, and their children, and their children.
May His favor be upon you for 1,000 generations.
And your family, and your children, and their children, and their children.
May His favor be upon you and 1,000 generations, and your family, and your children, and their children, and their children. May His favor be upon you and 1,000 generations, and your family, and your children, and their children, and their children. May His presence go before you, and behind you, and beside you, all around you, and within you. He is with you, He is with you, in the morning, in the evening, in the coming, and the going, in the weeping, in rejoicing. He is for you, 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 He is for you. And amen, amen,
So, no matter what your history is with the church and what you might have experienced in the past, we want you to know that here at Waypoint, we want to change the narrative of the city. We want to be a church and a faith community that shows the city that we are for them because God is for them. Now, next week, we're going to look at how that looks. And don't miss it, because Zola, who's part of our Waypoint family, he is going to bring the message. You do not want to miss that. Don't miss it. I'll be watching you. So, yeah, we've come to the end of our time together. It's been the first Sunday. It's been great being here with you. But we will be keeping you guys posted. Keep watching our social media for any news. We're going to be playing it week for week. We foresee for the next few weeks we're going to be gathering online. So keep watching. Keep looking out for any news of what's coming up. But until then, have a great week. And remember, we are for you.